Okay, so the B'nai Reb Chia came up with a chiddush. They said that mitzvahs malika is even if you're machzer simonim la'chayrei ha'oref moilek. Even if you pull the simon around, so you puncture the simonim before. Now, it wasn't clear what they said. Ikadamri af machzer, which means the main malika is to first penetrate the oref, the spinal cord, with the nail of the coin, and then afterwards to go through the simonim, which are located in front of the chut hashedra. The ikadami machzer dafka. No, that is the way that you're supposed to do the malika, by first pulling the simonim around the back so that you puncture them first. Umistavra command omar af machzer. It's mistavra to say that the ikar malika is if you first puncture the neck and then the simonim, but if you did it differently and you pulled the simonim to the back, that would also be acceptable. The malika? No, malika. Did you do it from the front? Yeah. I hear. Dr. Gemara, that would be easy. Dr. Gemara, mimai. How do we know that it makes sense to say, according to Abchia, the main way to do malika is by breaking the neck bone first? Midikatani, because of our Mishnah. It says in our Mishnah, Shoichet min ha'oreif shechitasai psula, and ha'moilek min ha'oreif melikasai kshera. Now, if shechting from the oreif meant that you could pull the simonim around the back, well then if you shechted that way, that would sure be fine, because you shechted the simonim first. So in order to have an item which you contrast, where malika is kosher and shchita is treif, it has to be davka in a case where you leave the simonim where they are and you break it through the back. There, the shchita would be treif, but the malika would be kosher. So Zokt Gemara, v'i sol kedaitach, machzir, davka, that the right way to do malika is v'davka with the simonim being cut first. My ear your moilik. Vosabes davka moilik is kosher and shchita is not. Afilu sheichet nami. In this fashion, shchita would be kosher as well because you've sliced the simonim before you broke the back of the bird. Ela lav shema mina. It must be af machzir. All the B'nai Reb Chia are saying is that malika would be kosher, even though that's not the right way to do it. It would be kosher if you pulled the simonim to the back. Umas Nisan, which says that the shchita is not kosher in this fashion, is b'daloy hader. If you didn't pull the simonim to the back, so b'chagav, if you didn't pull the simonim to the back, then the malika would be kosher in this fashion, but the shchita would be possible. Amar Biyanai yikablu haroivim as shivosan. These two gentlemen, the B'nai Reb Chia, the Yingalat, that's what they call the Yingalat should accept that they are aufgeregt, they're slugged up. Why are they slugged up? The Katani, it says in the Mishnah, Nimtza kosher b'shchita pasal b'malika. And kosher b'malika pasal b'shchita. So after the Mishnah lists off the differences between shchita and malika, so we already know all the differences, the Mishnah seems to be repetitive, because the Mishnah then repeats that the shchita, the kashrus of shchita, is the inverse of the kashrus of the malika. Now it must be that it's not just trying to repeat the same halacha that the Mishnah already said beferish, that the shchita is from the neck and the malika is min malayev. It must be trying to give us another extra tidbit of information. So l'mutimai, what specifically, Dr. Rashi, are we looking to say is an additional distinction between malika and shchita? Imishum da'arif possible shchita, the kosher malika, and v'tzaver kosher l'shchita, v'nifel b'malika hatanale. That's a mafurish in the Mishnah before. So this extra repetitive contrast must be telling us a different halacha. My love. So let's suggest, what is it suggesting? Limute machzer simonim la'karei arif. Deloy. It must be that is a distinction. Machzer simonim la'karei arif. As Rashi says, lav limute chazara simonim, the kosher b'shchita, upasal b'malika. It would make sense to say that would be kosher by the shchita, because by shchita you're supposed to first sever the simonim, and by malika maybe bedafka you're not allowed to sever the simonim. You have to bedafka sever the neck first. That's how malika is done. So oibazoi, that must be the extra tidbit. So frekt Rashi, okay, so that explains nimsa ma de kosher b'shchita pasal b'malika. But it also says uma de kosher b'malika pasal b'shchita. What is that coming to teach us? So Rashi v'ayi de tana kosher b'shchita pasal b'malika, tana nami kosher b'malika pasal b'shchita. So it should be a parallel contrast. But maybe that's not that. If I find a chiddush for one of the comments, that's adequate. Zok the Gemara, Amar Rabba Bachana loy. That's not necessarily what the Mishnah is trying to tell us as far as a distinction between Melika and Shchita. Rather, it's the distinction that it's offering is Lamute Shen Vitziparin. Now, this Shen Vitziparin actually is the subject of a nice machlokes between Rashi and Tosfos, or between two Lashonis and Rashi. So, what is this Shen Vitziparin? Zokt Rashi, Umishum Seifa Nokatla. This is not describing what's kosher b'shchita and pasal by malika. Rather, this is describing what's kosher b'malika and pasal b'shchita. So, Rashi Mishum Seifa Nokatla, kosher b'malika, pasal b'shchita, lemute shein mechuberes v'tziparin mechuberes. Now, shein mechuberes and tziparin mechuberes will not work for shchita. Now, they won't work for malika. Shen mechuberes will not work for malika, but tziparin mechuberes will work for malika. The psula b'shchita. So the main point is that a shen mechuberes and the tziparin mechuberes will be possible for shchita. V'hachi k'amar, and this is what the Mishnah means to say with that extra contrast between the inverse kashrus of malika and shchita. Kasher b'malika, k'goyin tziparin mechuberes is possible shchita. The chivin dashmin and tziparin hu adin l'shein, that it's possible for shchita. But avada a shein is possible for malika as well. The time of mishum mechuberhu, va'aydi the tani seifa tani nami reisha. So Rashi learns that the shem v'tziparin is describing something that's kosher by malika and possible by shchita, right? But Rashi has a second lashon where he says that maybe it's referring to something that's actually kosher by shchita and possible by malika. But before we do that, I just want to learn the next step of the Gemara. For the Gemara, it doesn't make sense that our Mishnah here is telling us that a shen and a tziparin that's mechuber will not be good for shchita. You know why? Because shen v'tziparin behedya katanilu. We have a Mefurish Mishnah, we learned it, that says you cannot shecht with a shen v'tziparin when it's mechuber. Ella Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah lemute moilech umevi, to tell us that by shchita it's kosher if you're moilech umevi, if you move the knife back and forth. But by malika, it would not be kosher if the kohen moved back and forth with his nail. So Dr. Gemara, that really works out well. If in fact it is possible, so you have a perfect distinction. Moilech umevi is a good way to do shchita, but it's not a good way to do malika. But guess what? There's a shita who holds that if you move your knife back and forth, that would be a kosher or malika. So we're back to the drawing board. What is this inverse relationship between the malika and the shchita? Zok to Gemara, b'nei Reb Chia savrila command Amar moilech hamevi b'malika apostle. They can know it's possible. So from their perspective, this is a perfectly valid translation of the Mishnah. Okay, let's see Rashi. Shein v'tziparin behedya tanalu la'il b'misnisin chutz mimagol k'tzir v'amagira v'hashinayim v'tziparin. And the Gemara told us on Daf Yud Ches Amud Aleph that it's speaking b'mechuberes. Zokt Rashi, there was another girsa, not a girsa. There's another explanation of the Gemara that lamute shein v'tziparin was not telling you something that's kosher for malika and possible b'shchita. Actually, it's telling you something that's kosher b'shchita and possible by malika. And what is that? The istim of Rashi, the mereisha memayit shen telusha v'tziparin telusha by malika. The kosher b'shchita but upasul b'malika. If your shen is telusha, the shen wouldn't work anyway. But if your nail is telusha, it wouldn't work for malika. A kohen can't take a cut off nail and stick it through the neck. He's got to stick his thumb through the neck, right? So it's telling you for carrot the psul of telush by malika. Not the psul of mechuber by shchita. It's exactly the opposite. But Zot Rashi, I don't like this pshat. V'lo yi. Dimkein, loma hiskir shen v'tziparin. It has nothing to do with shen and tziparin. What it's all about is mechuber. Le mahachi lemute tolish, the possible malika. It should have said the difference, the additional inverse relationship between Malika and Shchita is Tolish. That's what it should have said, which applies to anything. It's not relevant what specific item that we are referring to is. That's one of the kashas that Rashi has on this lashon. But Tosfos, on the other hand, happens to like Rashi's second pshat. And Tosfos points out, the Ari Betlushin, so this is Tosfos is addressing Rashi's other kasha that we didn't learn, but he says that Tosfos likes the pshat. I supposed to say Tolish. So Tosfos does agree with Rashi's concern about that pshat, because the fact is it should have used the word Tolish, not the word Shen. So Tosfos points out something very funny, because we're not even suggesting, according to Rashi, we're talking about a tziporin, whether it's Tolish or Mechuber, known as a havamina that a Shen, a tooth, will be kosher for Malika. You never saw any picture book that shows the kohen biting off the head of the bird, right? But if you hold Shen is a question of kosher l'malika, how does that make sense? So the Tosfos in Paimul Perusha the Ari b'Mechubarin heich Shen kisher b'malika. On the tzada we said the first pshat of Rashi. In the first pshat of Rashi, we were saying something that's kosher for malika and possible for shchita. How is a Shen kosher b'malika? So Rashi says no. We're talking about only the tziporin is mutter b'malika, but the tziporin is not kosher for shchita, and the Gemara just throws in, and by the way, Shen is also not good for Shchita. Right? That's how Rashi learned. But Tosfos is learning that option in Rashi. You can't separate that. Which means, if you're going to say that the Shen and the Tziparin is possible by Shchita, so then you must be saying by contrast that the Shen is kosher for Malika. For Tosfos, how could a Shen be kosher for Malika? The problem is not because what I said, because he never saw a kohen biting off the head of the bird. He has a different problem. Haboy Yamin. How do you always need the right hand of the kohen. In teeth, you don't have a right hand. So Tosfos says, no, maybe your teeth is like a right hand. Maybe it doesn't really mean that Shen will be kosher l'malika. Like Rashi says, it just means there's no psul mechuber, but avada, the Shen itself, is not kosher l'malika. But Tosfos also says, and this is the interesting point that I wanted to highlight, is this small gara mishen. Could be if a kohen uses his left hand to do malika, that would be worse than if he used his tooth to do malika. Where do you find that the mouth, the tooth, can possibly be b'makam the right hand? Ki da'ashkan le'inyin chalitza, da'aminim beperek mitzvahs chalitza, the gidmis, a woman rachman l'tlan who doesn't have hands, chayletzes b'shina, she could do the chalitza with her teeth, like to untie the shoe and whatever action she has to take. Uvishalmi mashma the chalitza but Yamin. So you see that the mouth can be in place of the right hand. So that's why sometimes you want to give shulm to a little kid and he sticks in his left hand. And the father says, "Nein, the rechte Handele," and then the kid bites you. Now you know why? Because he knows his Tosfos. Because the mouth is considered as valid as the right hand. Okay, zok to Gemara weiter. Right, that's why he doesn't use an example of kahuna. Oh, come on, Shmuel. Okay, zok to Gemara weiter. So it's a mutay moedach maybe, and maybe they were hold on moedach maybe is possible. Amar of Kana, mitzvahs malika, kaitzetz v'yored. You cut and you go down. Basically, what it means is the kohen plunges his nail through the back of the neck of the bird. V'zuhi mitzvasa. This is the mitzvah. So, Savar Rab Avin al-Memar, what exactly is meant by Rav Kahana when he said koitzetz v'yored? He thought it means koitzetz v'yored in Moiluch umevi loy. The point that he was trying to make is you plunge the thumb, the nail of the thumb in, but you don't go back and forth. Amalei Rabbi Yirmiyah, not necessarily. Kol shekein the Moiluch umevi b'melika kosher. Adarabba, Moiluch umevi will be kosher. If you could even do it, just plunge in, Moiluch umevi is better. Umay zuhi mitzvasa. So what did Rav Kahana mean when he said zuhi mitzvasa? Ema Avzali Mitzvasa. He just meant to say that even if you're not Moilech Hamevi, you just plunge your nail in, that would be acceptable. Amar B'Yirmiyah Amar Shmuel. Kol HaKosher B'Shchita Kenegdoi B'Orev Kosher B'Malika. So now we have a funny member here, because this is exactly the opposite of what we were saying. Until now we were saying that the Shchita is the inverse of Malika. Now we're saying whatever is kosher b'shchita is kosher b'malika. That seems to contradict what we've learned until now. So Rashi jumps on that right away, and Rashi says, Amar Shmuel kol kosher Shmuel lav behilchas shchita ayri. Of course, he's not talking about hilchas shchita, because we know that the hilchas shchita are the inverse of the hilchas malika. You could ask many kashas if he's trying to say they share the same halachas. The savar moilech hamevi b'malika pasel ha'ika moilech hamevi the kosher b'shchita upasel b'malika. V'ika talish v'ika savar moilech hamevi b'malika kosher v'chol shegein kaitzitz v'yored kedarminin kosher seifa the dakinin ha'pasel pasel v'ha'ika kaitzitz v'yored the pasel b'shchita v'kosher b'malika. So it can't be talking about the method of the slaughtering, because clearly one is the inverse of the other. So what does Shmuel mean to say where there is in fact a similarity? All Shmuel is talking about the zone. What area of the neck you puncture, that's the same by shchita as it is by malika. Whichever area in the front of the neck of the bird is the right place to do shchita, right opposite that, in the back of the neck is the right place to do the malika.
Not a very clear statement.
Amar B'Yirmiyah Amar Shmuel kol kosher b'shchita connected ba'erev kosher b'malika. Ha possible b'shchita. It's possible malika. Zok Gemara lemute mai. What is it trying to tell us? And Rashi says that the lemute mai is the main chiddush of Shmuel, because the main halacha that he said is not really a chiddush. As Rashi says, we'll see that later. Is it coming to tell us that ikar simonim is not allowed? What does ikar simonim mean? So let's just see what Rashi says over here. Ha apostle. The main chiddush of Shmuel is just to tell us that something that's possible by shchita will be possible by malika. The imisham higufa la sheminan. The Chol Mular of Kosher Malika, Shmuel can't really be telling us that the area on the back of the neck of the bird to make the Malika is parallel to the area on the front of the bird which makes Shchita. That's not a Chiddush. Because Ha Behed Yatani Laba Misnisin. Our Mishnah already says that. So Shmuel's main Chiddush must be the Diuk side. El Shmuel Pasal Asal Ashminan Lemu'ute Mai. So what exactly is he trying to pasel? The kivan the apostle b'shchita ye apostle b'malika. It's lemute lemayla min atzavar. The apostle b'malika that can be either lo itrach. The hainu oyrif mamish v'hedzik siv mimalarpoi v'layarpoi. So once again, Shmuel cannot be talking about the area where the above and below, because that's quite clear. So it must be lemute simonim shenekru. So what are these things simonim shenekru? The kivan the ein oisoi tzavar kosher l'shchita. This tzavar is not kosher l'shchita. So the Rashi says elsewhere that we're talking about the one of the two simonim simply got dislodged, got disconnected. Zokt Rashi, that's called the treifa. If it's called the treifa, this animal is no longer royu l'shchita, because even if you shecht it, it's going to be a treifa. So therefore, ein orev kenegdai kosher l'malika. Therefore, if you had one of the simonim that was uprooted, this bird will not be kosher l'malika. That's how Rashi learns. The problem with that is as follows. According to Rashi Shita, that if one of the simonim got torn out, so it's not pshat you're doing ikar. Ikar simonim doesn't mean while you're doing the shchita, you did an ikar. That's one of the 5 psulat shchita, which is a nevela. He's saying once it's shechting an animal or making a malik on an animal, that its siman had been prior to that shchita being dislodged, and there's a treifa. In fact, was tema amai itzrich lashminan the chehecha the ikar pasal b'shchita pasal nami b'malika. This is a psul tarfus. We have an animal that became treifa before you shechted it. So I need a Mishnah to tell me, I need Shmuel to tell me that the same way it's not a kosher shchita, it's not a kosher malika, it's a tray for the animal. What's the difference if it had a head in its brain? We need a chiddush to say that it's not kosher malika, it's a tray for the animal. Me'ayin hayu lanu lahashu b'malika yoshemi b'shchita. V'aloi malak v'nim to tray for posel l'chula alma. So the question is here, this isn't the question of a hechsher of how to do the process. It's not a question of how to do the malika, how to do the shchita. It's just saying that prior to the shchita, it became treifa. Well, then prior to the malika, it became treifa. So why in the world do I need the Shmuel to tell us this? And therefore he asks, what? Rashi says it elsewhere that it's treifa. So Zok Taisvis, he wants to learn differently in our Gemara, and he wants to learn like the halachas gedolos. Aval l'divrei halachas gedolos asher kula sugya shaper. The law have a treifa like they shchita simonim. He holds that if one of the simonim is necker, it's not a treifa. It's a psul in the shchita, and therefore it makes sense that we need Shmuel to tell us that it's a psul in the malika, but it's not treifa. Okay, weiter. Let's see the Heilige Gemara weiter. Sagt die Gemara, Mai, Ilema lemute iker simonim, v'atani Rami bar Yecheskel. Rami bar Yecheskel taught us a brisa. And what is that? Ein iker simonim ba'oif. There is no psul of iker simonim ba'oif. So how could you tell me that we're learning this parallel from shchita to malika? By malika, in fact, it wouldn't even be a problem at all. So therefore, what does Shmuel mean in his comparison from shchita to malika? Omar Papa lemute roishoi, to tell us that if you made malika on the head itself, it wouldn't be kosher. In fact, Gemara roishoi pshita mi malarpay amar rachmana v'loy b'roishoi. I don't need Shmuel to tell me that halacha. Zok Gemara my roishoi shipu roishoi. It means not mamish the back of his head, but lower than the further back, most part of the head, where it starts to taper down towards his neck. That's the part of the neck that Shmuel's trying to tell us malika doesn't work. Now that's not in the Eirif, so why should you think it's good? Kegoyin the nokat mishipu roishai vehigrim ve'ozal adamotai tasoi. It's a case of malika with hagrama. What if he began the malika out of the zone at the back of the head, but not in the neck, and he goes down and then he cuts across? So the second third and the third third of his malika was done in the right zone, but only the first third of the malika was done out of the zone, which is exactly Rab Huna's case, the parallel case by shchita. Uchad Huna Amar Rabasi, Damar Rab Huna Amar Rabasi, higrim shlish, v'shachat shnei shlish psula. If you made hagrama on the first third of your shchita, even though you came back into the zone and you crossed the finish line with roiv simonim, in the zone, it will still be possible. So according to Rav Huna, Shmuel is saying, Zosta Visin, that same way it wouldn't work for shchita, a similar type of action by the malika would not work either. Amalei Rab Acha Barei de Rava l'Ravashi. Hadatani Rami bar Yecheskel ein ikur simanim ba'oiv. That Rami bar Yecheskel brought a brisa that says that there is no psul of treifa when the simon is ripped out by a knife. Loy amran ela lemandamar ein shchita la'oif min ha'Torah. If you hold that there's no shchita la'oif min ha'Torah, so then you could say, since you don't need shchita anyway, so it doesn't matter if one of the simanim was ripped out. Frek Tosfos, if that's the case, if you hold ein shchita la'oif min ha'Torah, and therefore one of the simanim could be ripped out, right? Frek Tosfos, then how would you ever have an avelas oif tahar? There's something the Torah talks about an avelas oif tahar. If it's kosher with the simon ripped out because there ain't shchita loif in the Torah, so in the Torah you don't even need shchita. So if in the Torah you don't even need shchita, how could you ever have an avelas oif tahar? Frek Tosfos, ein lahakrish lo yidei heichem ishkachas nevelas oif tahar. The metama begodim abeis abliya, right? It has a special status nevelas oif tahar. It's metama begodim abeis abliya, but you don't need shchita. Zok Tosfos in the hid leiboy shchita nechira miyaboy b'savanim, and the vela is if you plunge the knife into its chest, but if you would have if you would have punctured the simanim, that would make it ois nevelas oif tahar. It's a very interesting chiddush because if you think about it, if ain't shechita loif in the Torah, so how do you have nevela?
It's not only with the.
Well, doesn't the nevela mean you didn't have a kosher shechita? We normally a nevela means you didn't have a kosher shechita. But if you don't need shechita, how can you be nevela? That's exactly what I was saying. It's roadkill. If you cut the simanim, even if you didn't use a knife, that would make it ois nevela. It's an interesting concept. Okay, zogt gemor weiter. But if you hold yesh shechita loif min haTorah, aval man damer yesh shechita loif min haTorah, then yesh ikar. Then there will be a problem if one of the simanim are uprooted. That is how, who wanted to present it? That is how Rav Acha Berei de Rava wanted to present it to Rav Ashi. That if yesh shechita loif min haTorah, then ikar simanim should be a problem, because you see the simanim are important. If ain't shechita loif min haTorah means those simanim aren't important, then even one of the simanim got the law, it wouldn't be a big deal. So Rav Ashi said back, Adarabah, I would make the exact opposite argument. Ipcha mistabra. That means there's a halacha l'Moshe Sinai, because it's not before it's written in the Torah anywhere about shechita by a knife. It must be a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Moshe was instructed by the Rebbeinu Shalom exactly, first of all, that oif does require shechita, and exactly what the process of what that shechita is, and when it's kosher and when it's not kosher. So Hashem could have made any set of parameters that he wants. So the parameters could have been that by an oif it's only one siman, and by an oif if one of the simanim are uprooted, it would be kosher. Then it would make sense, because once it's addicted with the raisa, it could have any rules, and any rules are acceptable. So even if you want to learn that an oif is similar to a behema, the Gzeres HaKosov, meaning the halacha l'Moshe Mizina, could have been that no, a knife is different, it's unique. If you hold ain't shechita loif in the Torah, element of Seifrim, so then they're not going to make up their own set of parameters. They're going to import the parameters that they've seen by behema. Where would they have known of this concept of shechita? Behema. So if you're learning it off from behema, kula milsa behema. Why would they have made the halal distinction between the halacha of shechita and the kashrus of a behema to the kashrus of a bird? They're just trying to say we should treat a bird like a behema. So the fact that it has a very unique set of parameters is an indication that this is nigzar milamayla. It's not just a creative gzeir of the Rabbanon. So he looked at it from exactly the opposite perspective. That's the beauty of Talmudic logic, because one side could make perfect sense, and then a moment later the other side could make perfect sense. Ravina, Amrli Ravin Barkisi, Ravina says that Ravin Barkisi told me halacha. Ha detani Rami Bar Yecheskel, ein ikar simanim ba'oiv, that le'amran ela b'malika, that would only be by malika. Aval b'shchita yesh ikar. So if it's a carbon, then you have a sarv ein ikar simanim ba'oiv. But by a regular chulin dekabur that you're making a shchita upon, there would be a problem. That's what he quoted from Rami Bar Yecheskel. So we already quoted Rami Bar Yecheskel's halacha on Amud Aleph. All he said was an ikar simanim ba'oiv.
What do you say carbon?
I'm sorry? Well, but malika. Malika is always in nevela.
It's only by carbon?
Yeah, if you do a malika on a non-carbon, it's in nevela. So he wants to.
Unless you hold that
I thought you could do malika, you could do shechita.
Well, if you're Torah, right? If you hold yesh, if you hold the Tosfos hold that the chira is good, not true, because you're breaking the backbone first. And if you pull the simanim around it, but if you bust the back first, and we're going to soon see that makes it into a dead animal even before you hit the simanim. So Zok Gemara Abel B'Shchita Yeshikar. So that he's qualifying Rami Bar Yecheskel's general rule of Einikar Simanim. So this not only applies by Malika, not by Shchita. Freit the Gemara, the Yomer Rabbi Yirmiyah Amar Shmuel. Rabbi Yirmiyah Amar Shmuel said, once again, we're importing this from Amud Aleph. Kol akasher b'Shchita keneged b'Arif kasher b'Malika. Haposel. So Oy bezoi, it should be the same halacha that you have by Shchita, you should have by Malika. Zok to Gemara, Haposel, as Rashi says, V'tzav v'shenekri simonim is posel l'Shchita, heichim is kasher b'Malika. How could it be good for Malika, according to Shmuel? Zok to Gemara, maybe Ahu Peliga, maybe he argues, Hahud Rabbi Yirmiyah, Pliga de Rav Bar Kisi. You're right, the fact that Shmuel says that Malika and Shchita share this similarity, while Rav Bar Kisi's explanation of Rami Bar Yecheskel says that they're distinct, different from one another, that it itself might be a machlokes. Hahud Rabbi Yirmiyah pligi ad Rav Bar Kisi, Rabbi Yirmiyah savar the afal shchita einiker. He holds it applies across the board. Zokt Rashi, you don't really need to be so concerned about who's right about Rami Bar Yecheskel. You know why? Because we don't paskin like Rabbi Bar Yecheskel at all. For less hilchasa kamasnisa de Rami Bar Yecheskel. Because the Tanya we learned, so Rashi brings a raya that we don't pass like Rami Bar Yecheskel anyway, and in fact there is a problem of ikisimonim, sai by shchita and sai by malika, meaning if a bird had one of the simon dislodged, the animal would not be kosher.
I don't think that passes logic. Just because kol kosher b'shchita is kosher b'malika, it doesn't mean that the inverse is automatically true. That whatever's possible.
So on Amud Aleph, the Gemara addressed this, and the Gemara said that it must be that the inverse is true. So let me finish. So Rashi told us on Amud Aleph that the inverse must be true. Why must the inverse be true? Because the base halacha of kol kosher b'shchita kosher b'malika is not a chiddush. There's no chiddush, and we know from that because any possible suggestion of what you think the chiddush is in kol kosher b'shchita kosher b'malika, we already know first from a Mishnah. So the only possible chiddush that there could be in Shmuel's word is the diak of kol apostle. That's what. So Rashi right away nominav asher kasha, but Rashi says there's no possible explanation of any type of chiddush if it's not if Shmuel's main chiddush isn't kol apostle.
That was Rashi's thing about the diak.
Correct. Zok to Gemara hahu pliga. Amar Ziri. Zok Ziri, an interesting halacha. Nishbura mafrekas v'roiv basar ima. You broke the mafrekas and most of the meat. It means most of the circumference of the meat before you puncture the simonim. Nevela, that becomes a nevela, which really was an answer to what Moti asked. You don't need shchita. True, but if the mafrekas and most of the meat around the circumference of the bird was cut before you got to the simonim, then the animal is a nevela. Amram chista afana nami tanina. Now there's a shaila if this is a kasha. What's your chiddush? We have it on Mefurish Brisa, or if it's a raya. Malak b'sakin. If you made malika with a sakin, metama begodim abeis abliya. So we're saying if you make malika with a knife, meaning you shecht it from the back of the head of the bird, that would be nevela. So v'i amrit treifa hava. If you want to say treifa, in other words, if you want to argue on zeiri and say that it's not nevela, rather it's only a treifa, so then if that's the case, milikasa zui shchitasa. Malika is like shchita. You're puncturing everything. You're puncturing the simonim. So at least the hani losakin l'tahira midei nevela. At least the shchita of the simonim after you break the mafrekas should be matar midei nevela, because at least it was a shchita on the treifa. As soon as you busted the back of the neck, it became a treifa. But if you can continue on to sever the simonim, at least there was a shchita done on this animal that was a treifa, and it's not tummy. Yet that's not what it says. It says Malak b'sakim b'tam b'godim b'eis abliya. We say that it becomes an avela, even though at the end of the day you punctured the simonim. So you see clearly that it became an avela the moment you busted the backbone, and the roiv habasar, which occurs before they cut through the simonim, it must be that that's an avela, which is in support of zeiri.
We're talking about a korban, right? You did malika with a knife.
Correct.
For a korban.
Right.
Not, you say not, you didn't do malika.
Right. So it's not a kosher or carbon. The question is it a nevela? Zok the Gemara to nevela.
But it wasn't Chullin.
Okay.
That right? We're talking
Yeah, it wasn't chulin. That's right. That's clear.
Because the Torah says you have to give moloch.
Right, so I'm asking it's not a kosher or carbon, but is it an avela? Maybe just a treif, it's a possible bird. But is it metama, begodim, abeis abliya? Does it have a tumas nevela? So the Brisa says it does not have a tumas nevela. Forget it says it does have a tumas nevela. So it's a raya that it's an nevela, not a treifa. Zok Gemara, maybe not. Amri hasam mishum dalav shchita hiklal. Maybe because it's not a shchita at all. If it in fact could qualify as a shchita, then it would not be tamei. As a nevela, it would be tamei, it would be possible as a treifa. But here it's not a shchita at all. Why isn't it a shchita at all? Why isn't it a shchita? Two reasons possible. My timer, Rafun Amar Mipnei Shehu Machlit, because if you're doing malika from the back, it's automatically chalada. What does chalada mean? Chalada means that the shechita has to be done while the blade is visible the whole time. If you're shechting an animal from the neck, the moment your knife hits the skin, it splits open. Remember we said the base shechita mirvach ravach. So the knife and blade is visible the whole time. But when you're shechting from the backbone doesn't pull apart. You force your blade in between two vertebrae, right? And the vertebrae are hugging the knife. So the knife is covered over. That's a psul and shechita. So mamela, it's a partial shechita. Now, vibalt when you shech from the back, by definition, it's going to be chalada. So therefore, you have a bird that was slaughtered without a shechita. If you could magically create a scenario where the blade would be visible, then it would be a kosher shechita. But practically speaking, when you're shechting from the back, the blade's not going to be visible as it's severing the simonim, because it's already inside the backbone.
Even if you're bending the neck, the way you do by a shechita.
Usually bend it back. Exactly. What if you bend it the other way? But the Gemara is saying the pasha says you wouldn't. Rav Omar mepneishu doiris. There's another problem. When you're doing the shechita with a knife, you're not going to be moving back and forth nicely. You're going to be forcing it in. That's called a psul of drasa. So therefore, it's not considered a valid shechita. So if you could technically do a valid shechita mimala oiref, maybe it would only be a treifa. The reason why the Braysh says that it's an avela is because you couldn't do it otherwise. But you don't necessarily have a raya that nishbar mafrekas for basima is an avela. Maybe it could still be a treifa and it'll be kosher. Just that how are you going to do a shechita on it? Zokt Gemara, Mandam Pneishu Machlid, my time Aloy Amr Pneishu Tairis. Why didn't he say that this shechita is possible because it's drasa? Because Kasavar Moilech Umevi b'malika kosher. Because he holds that you were doing a malika. You were doing a malika by going back and forth. So the same way you go back and forth by malika, you can go back and forth with a knife. It's saying Moilech Bazakin. So maybe you didn't do drasa. Which is going to address what Shlomi just said. My time, he obviously learns there's no problem of chalada. The knife is concealed in between the backbone of the animal. Like a little mouse, hadara beikri batim, that lives in the crevices of homes, hopefully not our homes, but lives in the crevices of homes. The machasya that is completely covered over. This is not so concealed. It's still somewhat visible. That wouldn't qualify as chalada. Therefore, if you made a shechita and chalada wasn't a problem, in fact, that would be not an avela. But here is a problem because it wasn't a shechita because of the drasa. Amarava, ikashli, if I do have a problem, and Rashi specifically, ikashli b'hamilsa the zeiri. If I do have a problem with zeiri's halacha, that said nishber mafrekas v'roi basa imar nevela, if I did have a problem with it, ha kashali. This is the problem that I have with it. V'chimesa oimer umaylik. If zeiri says that once the mafrekas and roi basar is cut, it's an nevela, that means it's dead. The normal way to do malika is exactly that way. First you bust the neck and the skin, and then only after that do you continue on to break the simonim. But that means when you're finishing your malika, the animal's dead already. How could there be a mitzvah of a malika on an animal that's already dead? If that's what your kasha is, then v'tikshilach oilas ha'oif the boy shnei simonim. Oilas ha'oif is different than every other bird. Every bird we hold, you only need shchita or malika of one siman. But oilas ha'oif, we learn from psukim that both simonim have to be severed during the malika. So there I'll ask you the same kasha. Once he broke one siman, the animal's dead. We know that for sure. A oif only needs shchita one siman, right? Yet you have to sever the second simonim. Why would I have to sever a second siman that's literally like cutting a siman on a dead bird? Why would that be part of the malika? Amaloi hasam kedei lekayim ba mitzvahs Abdullah. Maybe the reason why by the oif you need to shech the second siman or be moilek the second siman has nothing to do with the malika process. That's a different story. It says that by the bird you have to be mavdol, you have to completely separate the head from the body. They're put onto mizbech at separate pieces. So you're doing that not as a function of the malika, but as a function of the total separation. But could be it's not a din in the malika.
So we're always assuming by shechita, like by an animal, it's the severing of the kana or whatever on the vegetable.
Once you hit the roif simonim, the animal's dead.
By the bird,
It's severing of one simon.
No, but you're killing the animal before it.
By malika, if you do malika through the back,
Yeah.
that's exactly what the problem is. So then you're never doing a malika because it's a dead animal.
Malika means whatever that action is. Who cares if
So Raj, if you say it just becomes a treifa, as long as you do it in one movement, we'll say that it's one big shchita. But if you say it becomes an avail at that point, it's a dead animal. It doesn't make sense to say that even though it's in one motion, it's dead already. But if it's only a treifa, then I could live with it and say.
We're assuming that the shchita is maybe by malika, it's the whole ma'isa malika that makes the animal.
But it happens in sequence. But it happens in sequence. He's first breaking the neck of the animal and the meat. But it's dead already. So then why go further? The animal's dead.
You have to do that whole ma'isa.
What for? You can't suggest that malika is done on a dead animal. That's the Gemara's difficult.
And the animal only dies after 1.5 simanim.
Correct. No, after half a simon.
So what do you have to do the whole?
What do you have to do the second simon?
Yeah.
That's exactly what he's asking. By Oilos Oif, where you have to do 2 simonim, what do you have to do the second simon for?
You're saying even more.
Oh, you're asking on a regular animal needs 2 simonim. Why do you need the rubek kakuloi? Stop at the roiv. I'm not. Let's see what it says over here.
Yeah, but you're saying even more. That when you break the spine, it's dead.
And the brave busser, it's dead already. So why even the first simon? So even the first simon, how? Right. That's correct. So Zok to Gemara ihachi or nami. The or, when you make your malika, you don't cut the skin of the animal. You're just asked to cut the second simon. If it's al havdalah, well then go the whole way, rip the whole thing apart during the malika. Zok to Gemara, no. Kol ma'akev b'shchita, ma'akev b'havdalah. Whatever would typically be involved in a shchita, that's what you would need to fulfill the mitzvah of havdalah. And we know you don't have to cut the skin of the animal in order for it to be a good shchita. Frag to Gemara, I don't understand. And this is Moti's kasha. We know once you cut roiv simonim in a behema, it's dead. You don't have to do the final miyat. Yet, uma'akvi b'havdalah. When you're being mavdal, meaning by the bird of an oila, you need havdalah, out the havdalah, you need to cut the simon in full, even though roiv would have been a full malika already. It is a different question, but let's see if we can be madam him. So Zok to Gemara, you said a moment ago, I'm going to show you things that are ma'akev b'shchita, yet I'm going to show you things that are not ma'akev b'shchita, yet are ma'akev avdalah. So your explanation is not valid. Whatever needs to be shechted would be required for the havdalah of a oila sa'if. B'chol she'eina b'shchita, eina b'havdalah. Zok Gemara mikol makom kasha. Lamaisa, it's still shver, the kasha that we have on Jeiri. We might have solved the issue with the oila sa'if, but on Jeiri, if you hold the animals completely dead, once you break the back of the neck and the meat, why would you need to sever simonim on a dead animal? Amarava ema v'cheinu oitze chaytik shedru umafrekas beloy rav basar. Maybe the way you're supposed to do the malika is, yes, you cut the shedra and mafrekas, but don't cut the rav basar, cut the simonim first. So in fact, the malika would be done in a live animal. So we still have to go back to Mati's kasha. This kasha should be asked: why do you ever have to shecht the full simon? It's a dead animal once you shecht the rav simon. Right, that's your question. I don't know the answer to that question. Maybe right. So Mati is asking, but Lamaisa we checked all the simonim. What's the purpose in that? What's the purpose in checking all the simonim?
So you don't have to measure if you got right.
Okay. Okay, so we can stop here.
But his question goes a little bit further at him. For a bird, it's only one.
Correct.
You need right of one simon, which means it's dead.
Correct.
By an animal, maybe that's not true. Biologically, I don't know.
No, we actually learned yesterday that chiyas the animal leaves as soon as you cross the roiv line. Right. That's why we said if you started off
the roiv of both.
Well, each simon, you're the roiv both.
So then a bird is different.
So you're saying if one's behind the other, in order to do roiv in a second, you got to flip through first. But what you could ask about the second one? Why do you have to go through all the way? Okay, gewaltig.
I don't have that.
I think it's all one mice. You gotta do the one.
Could be when you have Reuben Kula, it's all Balmash. It could be, but by the bird, it's still a good kasha because there's the meat and the mafrekas, and then there's the simonim. It's two different stages. So Anabe Mevibalt, it's one simon. So saying you do the whole thing, even though Rav would be make the animal dead, that's not so schwer. But saying once you've already broken the mafrekas and Rav Botzer, the animal's dead, why now continue on to sever the simonim?